Welcome to today's deep dive. We are jumping into a source text today that, well, it manages to pack this massive, profound analysis of human psychology into just an incredibly small space.
Yeah, it really does.
It's this analytical and devotional text centered entirely around one single, very short sentence from the Gospel of Mark. I mean, it's chapter 2, verse 2, which simply reads, "He preached the word to them."
Right. It's so brief.
Yeah,
Yes.
exactly. And our mission for this deep dive is to extract what this ancient text tells us about human behavior.
Because there's a lot there.
There really is. Specifically, we're exploring the stark contrast the author draws between like our insatiable craving for spectacle and then the deeper, much more lasting impact of true substance.
Yeah, the difference between what we want and what we need.
Right. Now, just as a quick note before we get started, our source text is rooted in Christian theology, and it was written directly for an audience of believers.
We're looking at it objectively today.
Exactly. We are focusing on the fascinating psychological and behavioral observations the author makes about how human beings consume information, how we seek out experiences, and we're doing this regardless of your personal background or beliefs. We're just trying to convey the ideas in the text.
Which is important, yeah.
So to really grasp what the author is diagnosing here, you kind of have to put yourself inside the scene they're describing. Like imagine, just for a second, that you're standing outside a house in the ancient city of Capernaum.
Okay, picture that.
You are pressed shoulder to shoulder in this massive, sweating, totally chaotic crowd. You try to peek through the windows, but they are completely blocked by bodies.
Oh, wow. Just totally jammed.
Yeah, the doorway is jammed tight. There's this electric hum of voices in the air, right? Like a palpable, desperate anticipation.
Yeah.
You're straining your neck, trying to hear, and you're wondering, like, what incredible event is happening inside this house to draw a crowd like this? And more importantly, what are you expecting to see when you finally push your way to the front?
Well, the author paints this picture to isolate a very specific human drive. I mean, the crowd isn't gathered because they're eager for, a lecture on ethics or theology.
Right. They're not there for a college class.
No, not at all. News had spread that Jesus had returned to town, and this was the same figure who had recently been casting out demons and healing the sick.
Oh, so he had a reputation.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
The text points out that the crowd is filling every square inch of that space because they're driven by the desire to witness mighty works and outward wonders. They're drawn entirely by what he did rather than what he said.
Which brings up an interesting dilemma, I think. When you see a crowd that desperate people who have likely brought their sick friends and relatives hoping for a literal miracle, is the author suggesting that their desire to see those diseases vanish was, I don't know, inherently wrong?
That's the big question, isn't it?
Yeah, because wanting your sick friend to be healed seems like, the most natural, compassionate human response possible.
Oh, definitely. And the text is careful not to condemn the desire for healing itself.
Okay, that's good.
Yeah, the author acknowledges that the crowd's expectation was perfectly reasonable based on precedent. Like, Jesus had performed these outward wonders before.
Right.
But the author uses this historical moment to isolate a universal behavioral pattern. The physical healing is the immediate, visible display of power.
This is the flashy part.
Exactly. It addresses a symptom. So the author is highlighting how naturally our attention gravitates toward the symptom level, the visible, dramatic intervention, while we almost entirely ignore the underlying root cause.
Wow.
We're just wired to pay attention to the sudden, explosive change in our environment.
I mean, that makes sense from a basic survival standpoint. Like, if something dramatic happens right in front of you, your brain allocates all its resources to process that spectacle.
Right, it's just biology.
It requires almost zero effort to watch something amazing happen. You can just stand there and let the dopamine hit you, like watching a blockbuster movie or a really good magic show.
And that lack of effort is the crucial variable here. A visible miracle is completely passive for the observer. It demands nothing of you cognitively or emotionally other than, just your gaze. You don't have to change your habits, your mindset, your worldview to watch a disease disappear. You just, consume the event.
Which sets up what we could call the plot twist of this entire scene.
The big reveal.
Yeah. You have this massive, captive audience. They are practically hanging from the rafters, completely primed for a show. They're expecting fireworks.
Yeah.
And Mark 2.2 reveals that before any healing happens in that house, before any miracle is even recorded, he preached the word to them.
Right.
And the author notes this was his chief concern and earthly priority. But, I mean, Looking at this from a purely strategic standpoint, isn't that terrible marketing?
Oh, it's horrible marketing.
Right. If your goal is to build a massive movement and you have thousands of people clamoring for a magic trick, delivering a sermon feels like a deliberate subversion of their expectations. Like, why risk losing the crowd?
Well, it is a massive risk if your goal is simply to retain a crowd. But the author uses this subversion to illustrate the absolute difference between what a crowd wants and what an individual actually needs.
Need versus want.
Exactly. The text argues that his mission wasn't just to astonish the eyes or to relieve temporal suffering.
Right.
I mean, a healed limb is an incredible thing. But in the grand scheme of human existence, it's a temporary physical reality.
Yeah, you're still going to die eventually.
Exactly. The author frames the word as the only mechanism capable of addressing the root condition of the human soul. The goal was to awaken the soul and call people back to God, moving them from a temporary physical fix to a permanent internal shift.
It's basically the difference between handing someone a painkiller and actually taking the time to set the broken bone.
Oh, that's a great analogy.
Yeah, because the painkiller is what you want in that exact moment. It stops the immediate agony. But if you just take the pill and walk away, well, the bone heals wrong and you are fundamentally broken for the rest of your life. The text uses a really striking parallel here, calling miracles signs, but the word truth. It says his works pointed, but his word transformed.
Think about how a signpost functions. A signpost on a highway is incredibly useful, right? It tells you that a city is 50 miles ahead.
Sure.
But no rational person pulls their car over, sets up a tent, and decides to live permanently under the signpost.
No, that would be ridiculous.
Right. The sign is not the destination. So the author is arguing that the crowd in Capernaum wanted to build their houses around the signpost. They wanted the spectacle of the miracle.
Ah, I see.
Jesus, by prioritizing the preaching of the word, was forcing them to look at the actual destination.
And the author doesn't let the reader just observe this as some ancient historical blunder either. They pivot and hold this scene up as a mirror to modern behavior.
Yeah, it gets a bit uncomfortable here.
It really does. The text directly challenges modern audiences to examine their own motives when they enter spaces meant for learning or spirituality. The author asks, when you attend a church service or a conference, what are you actually seeking?
Right. Are you looking for faithful teaching? Or do you secretly desire something, more dramatic, more emotional, more visibly impressive? And the critique lands heavily on the danger of treating spaces of transformation as spaces of performance.
Yeah.
The text contrasts sitting as spectators rather than worshipers, observing rather than receiving, entertained rather than transformed. When we reduce a profound message to a performance, we completely insulate ourselves from its effects.
The modern equivalent of this crowd outside the door is definitely the algorithm on our phones.
Oh, absolutely.
It is perfectly optimized to give you the miracle whenever you want it. It feeds you a 2-second dopamine hit of outrage or a beautifully edited video of something astonishing.
Doom scrolling for quick hits.
Exactly. The algorithm knows exactly what the author of this text knew. Human beings crave the signpost. We want the quick emotional spike without the metabolic cost of deep comprehension. When you sit in a lecture hall or a meeting, or even when you're trying to learn a new skill online, it's so tempting to just look for the hack, right? The dramatic shortcut, rather than sitting through the foundational theory.
And the author brings up a fascinating concept regarding that dynamic proximity does not equal engagement.
Oh, that's a good point.
The text points out the deep irony of the people in Capernaum being near to Christ, literally pressed against the walls of the house, within earshot of his voice, yet remaining entirely inattentive to his actual message because they were waiting for the physical display of power.
That reframes the entire concept of attendance. I mean, you can have the textbook open on your desk, you can be sitting in the absolute front row of the seminar, but neurologically speaking, if your posture is wrong, you might as well be asleep.
Seriously.
If you're just a spectator waiting to be entertained by the delivery, you aren't actually receiving the substance.
And the text supports this with a rather chilling historical observation. The author notes that many people in that ancient crowd who witnessed the physical miracles with their own eyes eventually turned away.
Wait, really?
They left. Yeah, they saw the impossible, and yet they didn't stay. That historical fact completely dismantles the idea that witnessing a spectacle creates lasting commitment.
Wow.
The neurochemistry of amazement has a very short half-life. The dopamine spike you get from seeing a magic trick or a miracle fades incredibly fast, and once it's gone, your baseline resets. You then require an even bigger spectacle just to feel that same level of engagement again.
So it's like a hedonic treadmill of miracles.
Exactly.
If the spectacle is just an emotional sugar rush that leaves you empty and demanding more, the text claims the alternative is the Word. The author states that it is through the Word that faith is born, hearts are convicted, and minds are renewed.
Miracles merely stir amazement, but the Word creates a new creation. Now, this sounds great in theory, but I have to ask about the mechanics of this. How does hearing words fundamentally alter a person when seeing a literal miracle doesn't?
That's a fair question.
Yeah, because the author warns against chasing signs and asks, what profit is it to witness wonders if our hearts remain unchanged? So what is the actual mechanism for you, the listener, to stop being a passive spectator and actually undergo that transformation?
To understand the mechanism, we have to look closely at the specific verbs the author uses in their call to action. The process described is highly active. The author states one must lay aside every distraction, open your heart, and approach with humility and hunger.
Humility and hunger. Got it.
But the most crucial mechanism lies in how the author tells the reader to process the information. The text instructs you to listen attentively, not casually, and most importantly, to listen obediently, not critically.
Okay, wait, listen obediently.
Right.
But isn't critical thinking the entire point of deep learning?
I mean, if you're trying to become well-informed, you're taught to analyze, to question, and to critique the source material. Telling an audience to drop the critic's clipboard and listen obediently sounds a bit like asking them to turn off their brains.
I can see why you'd say that.
It borders on brainwashing if you just accept whatever you hear without pushing back, right?
That is a very modern friction point, absolutely. But we have to distinguish between critical thinking and defensive listening.
Defensive listening.
Yeah, when we listen critically in the way the author is warning against, our brain's defense mechanisms are highly active. We're sitting in judgment of the material. We evaluate the speaker's tone, their pacing, their rhetorical choices.
How, like grading a paper?
Exactly.
Yeah.
That posture keeps you entirely safe because it places you above the information. You are protecting your existing worldview by treating the message as an object to be graded.
You're treating the information as a performance to review rather than a truth to internalize.
Yes. When the author uses the word obediently, they are describing a state of cognitive vulnerability. To actually undergo neuroplasticity, to physically change the structure of your thoughts and beliefs, you have to temporarily lower those defenses. You have to allow the information to interrogate you rather than you interrogating the information.
That is so backward to how we normally operate.
It is. The author says you must let the word search, correct, and reshape you. You cannot be reshaped if your primary goal is to prove why the hammer striking you is holding the wrong angle.
That makes me think about learning a complex new language.
Oh, how so?
Well, if you just memorize a few vocabulary words to show off at a party, that's a spectacle. It's a party trick.
Right.
But if you want to actually become fluent, you have to submit to the syntax of that new language. You have to listen obediently to its rules, even when they feel awkward or contradict your native tongue.
Yeah, you have to let it in.
You have to let the structure of that new language completely rewire how you construct a sentence in your head. It is incredibly uncomfortable, and it requires you to be totally vulnerable to making mistakes.
That is a perfect parallel. Memorizing vocabulary is passive, but submitting to syntax is transformative.
Yeah.
The author's ultimate conclusion is a mandate built on that exact dynamic. Do not be satisfied with observing his works from a distance. Draw near. Because it is not the spectacle that saves, but the word that transforms. The entire text is a plea to move from the blocked doorway of safe observation into the highly invasive, uncomfortable room of actual change.
Well, we have journeyed through a really dense psychological landscape today.
We really have.
We started out in that chaotic, sweaty crowd in ancient Capernaum, feeling the desperation for a quick, magical fix. And we followed the author's logic as they unpacked why that desire for a spectacle is hardwired into us, but ultimately leaves us empty.
Yeah.
We've seen how easy it is to mistake proximity for engagement and how the algorithm of our modern world plays right into our craving for the signpost rather than the destination.
The author forces us to confront the reality that true transformation is never passive. It requires laying down our defensive, critical posture and allowing ourselves to be searched and corrected by substantive truth.
So, as we close out this deep dive, I want to turn this directly to you, the listener. Think about your own habits this week. Think about the media you consume, the skills you are trying to learn, or the spaces you enter for spiritual or personal growth.
Good questions to ask.
When you open a book, when you click on a video, or when you walk into a room, what is your underlying motive? Are you just chasing that quick 2-second dopamine hit of amazement? Are you looking for the laser light show?
Or are you engaging with the substance?
Exactly. Are you willing to do the uncomfortable work? Are you willing to lower your defenses, drop the critic's clipboard, and sit with material that might actually change your mind? It demands significantly more of you than just watching a show, but according to our source today, it's the only environment where genuine transformation can survive.
And I'll leave you with one final thought to mull over as you reflect on that. The author highlights the historical reality that many people who witnessed literal, undeniable miracles with their own two eyes still eventually walked away unchanged.
Which is wild to think about.
It is. So
Yeah.
if that is true, if physically seeing the impossible unfold in front of you is not enough to guarantee your loyalty or shift your core identity, what does that tell us about the absolute limits of relying on experiences or emotional highs to sustain our deepest commitments in the long run?